Seattle, January 2025, arrived with its signature drizzles. The city sparkled with lights from towering skyscrapers, but beneath Sarah Monroe's umbrella, the world was reduced to three tiny hands clinging tightly to her. Damien, Daniel, and Daisy, her 3-year-old triplets, walked along the rain-slicked sidewalk, their wide eyes marveling at the floating digital billboards on the street. Sarah smiled, though her heart felt unbearably heavy. This was a new beginning, but also a massive gamble. After 6 years living in a small town in Oregon, working at a local craft store to support her children, Sarah had decided to return to the city. Seattle wasn't just the place where she had once dreamed of becoming a graphic designer. It was also where she had once loved, once hurt, and once left everything behind. But now she was no longer the naive 24-year-old girl from 2019. She was a mother, and her children were the only reason she kept moving forward. Sarah had applied for a design position at a tech startup called Spark Vibe, a small company advertised as a space for creative freedom. What she didn't know was that just weeks earlier, Spark Vibe had been acquired by Blackwell Industries, the tech giant led by Ethan Blackwell, the man she once loved. To Sarah, Ethan was nothing more than a painful memory, locked away in the drawer of the past. She didn't read the news, didn't follow updates about billionaires, and had no idea she was about to walk straight into fate. Today was interview day. Sarah had no choice but to bring her kids along. She couldn't find a sitter. She knelt down and gave them strict instructions. Stay in the waiting room. No wandering, okay? Damien, the most sensitive of the three, nodded seriously, his big brown eyes brimming with curiosity. Daniel, quiet and fascinated by machines, clutched his handmade robot model, and Daisy, the frail one with pale blonde hair, held her mother's hand tightly and coughed softly. "I'll be back soon," Sarah reassured her, brushing her daughter's hair. The Spark Vibe building sat in the heart of Seattle, a modern glass high-rise with touchscreens embedded throughout the lobby. Sarah seated her children in the waiting area, where soft couches surrounded a large screen displaying an ad for artificial intelligence. She gave Damien a firm look. "You're the oldest. Watch over Daniel and Daisy, okay?" He nodded, though his eyes had already drifted to the far end of the lobby, where a glass door slid open to reveal a brightly lit hallway filled with glowing tech. The interview went smoothly. The recruiter, a young woman named Mia, seemed genuinely impressed by Sarah's portfolio. "We need creative minds like yours," Mia said with a smile. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she really could start over. But as she stepped out of the interview room, her heart nearly stopped. The waiting area was empty. Damien, Daniel, and Daisy were gone. "Kids?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. She dashed across the lobby, scanning every corner, but only saw men in suits passing by, uninterested. She rushed to the front desk, nearly shouting, "My kids! 3 of them. Where are they?" The receptionist, a young woman, hesitantly checked the security footage. "I saw a little boy walk down the east corridor. Maybe he's yours?" Sarah didn't wait another second. She ran in that direction, sneakers pounding against the marble floor. The east corridor led to the executive office area, where glass doors bore the logo of Blackwell Industries. She didn't notice the name. She didn't connect the dots. All she cared about was finding her children. Meanwhile, Damien, his curiosity unstoppable, had led Daniel and Daisy toward a soft green light glowing behind a glass door. "Look, it's like in a sci-fi movie," he whispered, pointing at a large touchscreen display showing a 3D model of some futuristic device. Daniel, usually quiet, was captivated, and Daisy, though timid, held her brother's hand and followed. The glass doors slid open as they approached, revealing a large, luxurious office with an ebony desk and windows offering a sweeping view of Seattle. At the far end of the room sat Ethan Blackwell, brows furrowed as he read a report on his screen. 35 now, he looked just as sharp as he had 6 years ago, with a few more lines at the corners of his eyes. His tailored gray suit fit perfectly, his brown hair was neatly styled, and his piercing blue eyes, the very ones that once made Sarah's heart flutter, were now laser-focused on work. He didn't hear the soft footsteps behind him until a small robot model clattered to the floor. Ethan looked up, ready to speak, then froze. In front of him stood a 5-year-old boy with messy brown hair, bright blue eyes that mirrored his own childhood, and a sheepish smile. "Sorry, I just wanted to see that screen," Damien said, pointing at the device on the desk. Daniel stood behind him, clutching the robot, while Daisy clung to her brother, coughing quietly. Ethan blinked, feeling as though time itself had stopped. Damien's face, no, all three children's faces, held eerie familiarity. He stood, taking a cautious step forward, voice soft but wary. "Who are you? Who brought you here?" Before Damien could respond, the door burst open. Sarah rushed in, breathless, hair in disarray. "Damien, Daniel, Daisy, I told you not to—" She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes locked onto Ethan. Time rewound. The man before her with those blue eyes and commanding presence was Ethan Blackwell, the man she had once loved, once thought would be her whole world, until he shattered her heart 6 years ago. Ethan was just as stunned. "Sarah?" His voice cracked, disbelief etched across his face. He had never expected to see her again, the woman who had vanished without a word. And now she stood before him, with 3 children who looked unmistakably like him. Sarah quickly composed herself, though her heart pounded violently. She knelt, pulling her children close. "I'm sorry for the disturbance," she said stiffly, avoiding Ethan's gaze. "We're leaving now." She stood, took her children's hands and walked briskly toward the door. "Wait!" Ethan called out, but Sarah didn't look back. The glass door closed behind her, leaving him standing alone, reeling. Damien, Daniel, Daisy, the names echoed in his mind. And Sarah, the woman he had once loved, once lost. This couldn't be a coincidence. Ethan turned back to his desk and pressed a button on the phone. "Lena," he said to his assistant, voice cold but firm, "find everything you can on a woman named Sarah Monroe. Immediately." Meanwhile, Sarah guided her children out of the building, holding them close beneath the Seattle rain. She had no idea that the door she had locked tightly 6 years ago had just been opened again. The rain in Seattle continued to fall, tracing blurred streams down the windows of Ethan Blackwell's office. He stood there, one hand braced against his ebony desk, eyes fixed on the glass door where Sarah and the 3 children had just disappeared. The boy, Damien, the name Sarah had called him, was etched into his mind. Those deep blue eyes, the tousled brown hair, and that shy smile mirrored a photo Ethan had once seen in his mother's old album, a picture of himself at age 5. Not just Damien. The other 2, Daniel and Daisy, also carried features disturbingly familiar, like miniature versions of himself. Ethan wasn't a man easily shaken. 6 years at the helm of Blackwell Industries had taught him how to stay composed, no matter the surprise. But now that composure was cracking. Sarah Monroe. Her name rang in his mind, dragging up memories he had tried hard to bury. Her bright smile during her internship at Blackwell, the evenings they spent beneath Seattle's soft lights, and then her sudden disappearance 6 years ago, without a single word. He'd told himself she had chosen to leave, but now her reappearance with 3 children made everything spin out of control. He sat down, his hand absently brushing across the touchscreen on his desk. A thought struck, sharp, undeniable. Those children might be mine. The idea made his heart race and sent a strange chill through him. He didn't know anything about them. He didn't know anything about Sarah's life over the past 6 years, but his instincts screamed that this was no coincidence. The ring of his phone snapped him back to reality. Lena, his assistant, spoke in her crisp, professional tone. "Sir, I've looked into Sarah Monroe as you requested. She recently applied for the graphic design position at SparkVibe, our newly acquired subsidiary. Her file lists her as 30 years old, recently relocated from Oregon, and—" Lena hesitated. "She's the mother of 5-year-old triplets." Ethan's hand clenched, voice steady but tight. "What are their names?" "Damien, Daniel, and Daisy Monroe," Lena answered. "I can dig for more information, but it'll take some time." "Do it," Ethan ordered, his tone cold but urgent. "I want everything. Where she's living, her work history, her family situation, all of it." He ended the call and turned back to the window. 5 years old. Sarah had left 6 years ago. The timing matched too perfectly. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the outskirts of Seattle, Sarah sat holding Daisy in her arms. The little girl still coughed softly, her face pale but her smile sweet. Damien and Daniel were on the floor, playing with the robot model Daniel had painstakingly assembled. "Mom," Damien asked suddenly, his curious eyes fixed on her. "Who was that man in the office? He looked at us really weird." Sarah froze, her hands tightening without realizing it. "He's just someone who works there," she replied, her voice unsteady. "You can't run off like that again. Do you hear me? You scared me." She leaned down and kissed Daisy's forehead, trying to hide the panic in her chest. Ethan Blackwell. She had thought she could forget him, but the moment she looked into those blue eyes, all the memories came flooding back like a tidal wave. His smile, his promises, and that cold, devastating message on Blackwell's internal app. "We're not right for each other. Don't contact me again." She had read it hundreds of times until her tears blurred the screen. 6 years ago, Sarah was a hopeful intern who believed love could conquer anything. But that message, paired with a tabloid article announcing Ethan's engagement to the daughter of a powerful family, had shattered everything. She had fled Seattle carrying a secret, the children she refused to raise in the shadow of a man who clearly didn't want them. And now he was just steps away again. The way he looked at Damien had terrified her. Did he recognize him? Was he suspicious? Sarah stood and poured a glass of water, trying to calm her racing thoughts. He doesn't know, she told herself, and he won't. She had built a life for her children, and she wouldn't let the past ruin it. If she got the job at Spark Vibe, she'd keep her distance, work hard, and make sure Ethan Blackwell never entered her children's world. But Ethan wasn't the kind of man to let go. Later that evening, under the bright lights of his office, he received an email from Lena. The attached file included Sarah's application, her temporary Seattle address, and a photo, taken at a park in Oregon, of her with the 3 children. Ethan zoomed in on the image, studying the faces of Damien, Daniel, and Daisy. His chest tightened. Not just Damien. Daniel had his thick eyebrows, and Daisy, though frail, wore a smile eerily similar to his mother Eleanor's in the old family photos. He remembered the moment Sarah had burst into his office, hair a mess, eyes wide with fear, but fierce in her protection of the children. She had changed. She was no longer the innocent girl he once knew. She was stronger now, but more distant too. "Sorry for the disturbance," she'd said, avoiding his eyes like looking at him physically hurt. Why did she leave 6 years ago? Why didn't she ever come back? And these children, who are they really? Ethan shut his laptop, stood, and stared out at the city swallowed in darkness. He didn't believe in coincidences. Sarah Monroe wasn't just a ghost from the past. She was the answer to questions he had never dared to ask. And he would find the truth, no matter how long it took. Sarah sat in the dimly lit apartment on the outskirts of Seattle, the soft glow of a desk lamp casting a warm hue on her face. Daisy was already asleep, her breathing gentle on the small bed, while Damien and Daniel whispered to each other about the robot model in the corner of the room. But Sarah's mind wasn't there. The unexpected encounter with Ethan Blackwell the day before, his stunned gaze when he looked at the children, had flung wide open the door to a past she had spent 6 years trying to seal shut. She closed her eyes and the memories came rushing back, clear as if it had happened only yesterday. Back in 2019, Sarah Monroe was 24, a dreamy and ambitious graphic design intern at Blackwell Industries. Seattle, with its rain-soaked streets and glittering skyline, felt like the perfect place to build a future. Blackwell Industries, a tech titan, was every graduate's dream workplace. But what truly made her heart race wasn't the innovative projects or sleek office spaces. It was Ethan Blackwell. At the time, Ethan was 29, not yet the cold CEO he had become. He was the head of product development, brilliant, sharp, but with a smile that seemed meant only for Sarah. They met during a team meeting when Sarah presented a UI design concept for a new app. "You have talent," Ethan said, his deep blue eyes locking with hers, and she felt her cheeks flush. From that moment, brief hallway chats turned into after-work coffees and then into weekend walks along Puget Sound, where Ethan shared dreams of making technology accessible to all, and Sarah talked about the sketches she'd drawn since she was a child. Their love blossomed quickly, intense yet discreet. Ethan, heir to the Blackwell empire, disliked attention. Sarah, a small-town girl, was unaccustomed to the glitz of high society. But when they were together, they were just Ethan and Sarah. No barriers, no expectations. One summer night, under the soft moonlight in Ethan's apartment, they crossed a line. Lying in his arms, Sarah felt as though the world had melted away. "I'll always be here, Sarah," Ethan had whispered, and she believed him. But weeks later, everything changed. Sarah discovered she was pregnant. Panic hit first, but underneath it was joy. The babies, she didn't yet know it was triplets, were a gift born of love. She decided to tell Ethan, even though she feared he might not be ready. She planned to meet him after work, rehearsing her words over and over in her head. But before she could speak to him, a notification popped up on her phone. From Blackwell Connect, the company's internal messaging app. It was from Ethan Blackwell's verified account, marked by the badge reserved for senior executives. The message was brief and clinical, the way he approved business reports. "Sarah, we're not right for each other. Don't contact me again." Sarah read it over and over, her heart stopping. The tone was unmistakably Ethan, blunt, decisive, like the way he handled meetings. But what shattered her was the finality. No explanation, no chance to speak. She tried calling, hands trembling. But the only number she had, his work line, returned a message. No longer in service. She messaged him through Blackwell Connect. "Ethan, I need to talk. Please." There was no reply. She even went to the office only to be told by security that Ethan was out of the country on business. Desperate, she left a handwritten note at the front desk. "Ethan, I need to see you. Sarah." She never knew that note was intercepted and quietly destroyed by Helen, the personal assistant of Eleanor Blackwell, Ethan's mother. Helen wasn't acting out of loyalty alone. Eleanor had promised her a promotion to upper management if she could take care of Sarah. To Eleanor, Sarah was a threat, a small-town intern with no pedigree, no prestige, utterly unfit for the future she envisioned for her son. Ethan was destined to inherit Blackwell Industries and marry into a powerful family to secure corporate alliances. "This girl will ruin everything," Eleanor had said behind closed doors. "Make sure she disappears, and Ethan must never find out." Sarah knew nothing of this scheme. All she knew was that her heart had shattered. 2 days after the message, an article spread online. Ethan Blackwell engaged to Sophia Langley, heiress of Langley Tech. A photo of Ethan smiling beside a glamorous blonde in a glittering evening gown struck like a final blow. Sitting alone in her apartment, tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks as her hand rested over her stomach. "It's just you and me now," she whispered, though she didn't yet know there were 3 lives growing inside her. She went back to Blackwell Industries one last time, praying to see Ethan, but security told her he wasn't scheduled to return. Standing beneath the relentless Seattle rain, Sarah felt invisible, small and helpless against the Blackwell empire. She decided to leave, not just because her heart was broken, but because she wanted to protect her children from a father who, it seemed, didn't want them. She moved to a small town in Oregon, took a job at a craft store, and raised Damien, Daniel, and Daisy with all the love she had. Every night, watching them sleep, she reminded herself she had made the right choice. But now, as the memories of Ethan came rushing back, she couldn't help but wonder, did I really know him at all? The Seattle rain had finally eased, leaving shimmering puddles on the streets. In Ethan Blackwell's expansive office, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating his desk, where a child's drawing lay neatly placed. The picture, sent through Blackwell Industries' internal mail system, was a single sheet of A4 paper, drawn with clumsy but heartfelt crayon strokes. In the center were 4 stick figures holding hands, a long-haired woman, 3 small children, and a tall man with carefully colored blue eyes. Beneath it, the scribbled handwriting of a 5-year-old read, "I think I know who my daddy is, for Mr. Ethan." Ethan stared at the drawing, his fingertip gently tracing the blue crayon. Damien, the curious, sensitive boy who had stumbled into his office 2 weeks ago, was now tugging at his heart in a way Ethan hadn't expected. He had reviewed the file Lena sent him over and over, Sarah's application, the photos of her children, and the timelines that aligned far too perfectly. Damien, Daniel, and Daisy, 5 years old, born just months after Sarah left Seattle. He didn't need a DNA test to suspect the truth, but he also couldn't act on impulse. U.S. law prohibited DNA testing of minors without legal parental consent, and Ethan, despite his influence, had no desire to cross ethical lines. More than anything, he wanted the truth to come from Sarah herself, not from some cold lab report. He picked up his phone and called Lena. "Schedule a meeting with Sarah Monroe. Just the two of us. No one else. Tell her it's regarding her work at Spark Vibe." He paused, knowing Sarah wouldn't agree easily. She'd kept her distance since that unexpected encounter, and he could feel the invisible wall she had built. But Damien's drawing was a plea, a door opening, and Ethan couldn't ignore it. Meanwhile, Sarah sat in the small office at Spark Vibe, her eyes focused on her computer screen. She had just been officially hired as a graphic designer, a huge step after years of odd jobs in Oregon. But her joy was clouded by what she had discovered the previous week. Spark Vibe was now a subsidiary of Blackwell Industries. Ethan Blackwell, the man she once loved and ran from, was now indirectly her boss. Every day she came to work, she worried she might run into him. Thankfully, he occupied the top floor while she worked in the design wing far below. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. Mia, her manager, spoke in a calm voice. "Sarah, Mr. Blackwell would like to meet with you. Just a quick conversation about your position. This afternoon, would that work?" Sarah froze, her hand tightening around her pencil. She wanted to refuse, but that morning Damien had asked her, "Mom, will Mr. Ethan come back?" And that look in his eyes. She had to face Ethan if she wanted to protect her children. "Okay," Sarah replied stiffly, "but I have conditions. No press. No one else is to know about this meeting." Mia agreed, and Sarah's stomach nodded. She had no idea Damien had sent the drawing, no idea her son's innocent gesture had pulled her into a conversation she wasn't ready to have. That afternoon, Sarah stepped into Ethan's office, her heart pounding. The room looked just as it had 2 weeks ago. An ebony desk, windows overlooking Seattle, and an atmosphere steeped in authority. Ethan rose to his feet, his tailored gray suit perfectly in place, his piercing blue eyes fixed on her with a mix of curiosity and restraint. "Thank you for coming, Sarah," he said, his voice low. He gestured to the seat across from his desk, but Sarah remained standing, her hand clutching her bag strap tightly. "I'm here about work," she said flatly. "If this isn't important, I'll be leaving." She avoided his gaze, terrified that one look would unravel her. Ethan didn't respond right away. Instead, he picked up the drawing and placed it on the desk, turning it toward her. "This was sent to me," he said, voice calm but pointed. "Damien. He wrote that he thinks he knows who his father is." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She rushed forward, snatching the paper, panic in her eyes. "Damien doesn't know what he's doing," she said, her voice trembling. "He's just a curious child. Don't read too much into it." She shoved the drawing into her bag as if hiding it could erase Ethan's suspicions. "Sarah," Ethan said, stepping closer. His tone softened, but his resolve didn't waver. "I'm not trying to cause trouble, but I need to know the truth. These children, they might be mine, right?" He paused, locking eyes with her, waiting. Sarah turned away, taking a deep breath. She wanted to scream, to run, but she knew she couldn't. Her children were everything, and she would face anything to protect them. "If you want to talk about my kids," she said coldly, "there's nothing to discuss. They're mine. Only mine." Ethan's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had considered pushing for a DNA test, but the law and his conscience held him back. He didn't want to pressure Sarah. He wanted her to choose to tell him, even if it took time. "Fine," he said finally. "I respect that. But at least let me help. The children, they must need support, medical care, school, anything. I can provide financial assistance." Sarah laughed, bitter and sharp. "Financial assistance?" she scoffed, eyes flashing. "You think money fixes everything? I've raised them for 6 years without anyone's help." I don't need yours, Ethan. She turned to leave, but he called out, Sarah, I'm not trying to fight. I just want to do what's right. If they are. He couldn't finish the sentence. If they're connected to me, I want to take responsibility. Sarah stopped, her hand on the door handle. She turned back, pain etched into her features. Responsibility? 6 years ago, you chose to walk away. Don't talk to me about responsibility now. She opened the door and walked out, leaving Ethan reeling. He stared at the desk, at the copy of Damien's drawing he had kept before giving Sarah the original. Her final words echoed in his mind. You chose to walk away, but he hadn't. Sarah had vanished without a trace. So why was she speaking as if he had betrayed her? Ethan sat down, rubbing his temples. Something wasn't right, and he was going to find out what it was. Back in her apartment, Sarah held Damien in her arms, the crumpled drawing resting on the table. You can't send anything to Mr. Ethan again, okay? She said gently but firmly. Damien nodded, his eyes full of regret. I just wanted him to like us, he whispered. Sarah kissed his forehead, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She didn't know how to protect her children from the past, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't let Ethan take them away. Even if deep down, her heart still trembled at the sound of his voice. March in Seattle brought cold winds, but rare sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow on the small park near Blackwell Industries. Ethan Blackwell stood by a wooden bench, holding a paper bag of chocolate chip cookies, his gaze following 3 children playing on the grass. Damien, with his messy brown hair, was chasing a soccer ball, laughing out loud. Daniel, quieter, sat on a bench nearby, carefully assembling a plastic robot model. And Daisy, the frailest of the 3, with pale blonde hair, sat next to Ethan, her tiny hands clutching a cloth doll, coughing softly in the breeze. It had been 2 weeks since the tense conversation in Ethan's office. Sarah, though reluctant, had agreed to let Ethan see the children, under strict conditions. He was to be introduced only as Mr. Ethan, a family friend from work, and all interactions had to be supervised. I'm doing this for them, not for you, she'd said, her voice cold but trembling. Ethan had nodded, accepting her boundaries. He understood now. Fatherhood wasn't a birthright. It had to be built, slowly, with patience and sincerity. Today marked his 3rd visit with the children. He had chosen the park instead of the office to help them feel more comfortable. Damien was the first to break the ice, pulling Ethan into a game of soccer. Mr. Ethan, you kick harder than Mom, Damien shouted, making Ethan laugh, his first genuine laugh in weeks. Daniel, though quiet, had started asking Ethan about technology, his eyes lighting up as Ethan explained how the touchscreen in his office worked. But it was Daisy, the most delicate of the 3, who stirred something deeper in Ethan. Are you cold, Daisy? Ethan asked gently, removing his tailored jacket and draping it over her shoulders. Daisy shook her head, but her faint smile worried him. Sarah had mentioned that Daisy was born prematurely and had always been weaker than her brothers. Every soft cough from her was a reminder of the responsibility he might have failed. Want me to tell you a story? Ethan asked, sitting beside her. Daisy nodded, her eyes bright. He improvised a tale about a little robot searching for his family, and Daisy giggled softly, leaning closer to him. In that moment, Ethan's heart warmed and ached. If they're mine, I've left them alone for far too long. A few feet away, Sarah pretended to scroll through work documents on her phone, but her eyes never strayed far from Ethan and the children. She had recently transferred to Blackwell Industries' main office, a move she initially resisted. But Mia, her manager, had convinced her it was a chance to work on larger projects. Sarah poured herself into her work, designing interfaces for a new app, and was surprised by how smoothly everything had gone. Her computer never lagged, approvals came quickly, and she'd even been assigned a part-time assistant. She didn't know Ethan had quietly ordered the IT team to ensure she had every tool she needed. He never interfered directly. He didn't want her to feel watched or controlled. He just wanted her to have time, for the kids and for herself. Watching Ethan with the children, Sarah's heart twisted. She hated how quickly the kids had taken to him. Damien no longer asked about Mr. Ethan with curiosity, but with excitement. Daniel, once reserved, now brought his robot creations to show off. And Daisy, her shy, cautious Daisy, had even given Ethan a paper flower, whispering, "For you, because you tell good stories." Sarah wanted to be angry at Ethan, to keep her wall up, but every small gesture, his patience with the children, the way he honored her boundaries, chipped away at her resolve. "Sarah," Ethan called gently as the children ran off to collect leaves. He approached slowly, keeping enough distance not to make her feel cornered. "Thank you for letting me be here. I know this isn't easy for you." He used you in the way he used to 6 years ago, and it made her heart skip before she caught herself. "Don't misunderstand," she said quickly, voice rigid. "I'm doing this for them. They need good people around, not for any other reason." She turned away, but Ethan didn't retreat. "I understand," he said, his voice calm. "But if there's anything the kids need, doctors, school support, or even just a fun day, please let me know. I won't force anything. I just want to be there." He looked at her not as a powerful CEO, but as a man learning how to care. Sarah didn't reply, only gave a small nod. She called the kids back, ending the visit earlier than planned. On the way home, Daisy held her mother's hand and whispered, "Mr. Ethan's nice, isn't he, Mommy?" Sarah gave a faint smile, brushing Daisy's hair. "He's trying, sweetheart." But inside, she couldn't deny what Ethan was doing, something she never believed he could 6 years ago, becoming part of their lives. That night, in their small apartment, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at a photo taken in Oregon. Damien, Daniel, and Daisy grinning under the sun. She'd once believed she could be both mother and father all by herself. But the way Ethan looked at Daisy today, when he wrapped his coat around her, made her wonder, am I denying them something they deserve? She shook her head, forcing the thought away. Ethan might be kind now, but 6 years ago, he chose to leave. She couldn't let herself trust him again. In his office, Ethan placed Daisy's paper flower next to Damien's drawing. He didn't know how to tear down Sarah's wall, but he knew he couldn't walk away. Fatherhood, he realized, wasn't about blood. It was in the little moments, a story, a smile, a day at the park. And he would fight for every single one, whether or not Sarah let him in. April 2025. The air in Seattle was thick with moisture from the morning rain. Sarah stood in her small office at Blackwell Industries, eyes skimming the design on her screen, though her mind was elsewhere. 3 months had passed since she'd come face to face with Ethan again, and everything had changed, for her and for the children. Damien, Daniel, and Daisy had grown increasingly attached to Mr. Ethan, and no matter how much Sarah tried to keep her distance, she couldn't deny one thing. Ethan was trying, truly trying, to become a part of their lives. But every time Daisy beamed while recounting something Ethan had done, every question Damien asked about him, Sarah felt her fear deepen. She was afraid the past would repeat itself, that Ethan, or his family, would tear apart the fragile world she had built. That afternoon, as Sarah prepared to leave work and pick up the kids from daycare, a woman entered her office without knocking. She wore a deep sapphire silk dress, her silver hair neatly pinned back, and her eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Sarah stiffened immediately. She recognized her at once. Eleanor Blackwell, Ethan's mother, the formidable matriarch behind the Blackwell Empire. They had never met, but 6 years ago, Sarah had heard the whispers. Eleanor was powerful, uncompromising. "Ms. Monroe," Eleanor said slowly, her voice low and deliberate, as if delivering a sentence. She sat down across from Sarah without being invited, her gloved hands folded gracefully on the desk. Sarah clenched her fists, keeping her voice steady. "Mrs. Blackwell, if this is about my work, I can arrange a meeting with my manager." "Don't pretend," Eleanor interrupted sharply, her piercing gaze unwavering. "You know why I'm here? The children and Ethan." She tilted her head slightly, as if appraising Sarah. "You don't belong in this world, Miss Monroe. I respect that you're a mother, but you don't understand the pressures of a family like ours. Reputation, responsibility. Ethan needs someone who fits that mold, not a girl from a small town with 3 children." Her words sliced like a knife, resurrecting the pain from 6 years ago. Sarah rose to her feet, voice trembling but firm. You don't get to talk about my children. They are everything to me, and I don't need your approval or anyone else's. Eleanor offered a faint, dismissive smile. You misunderstand. I didn't come to argue. I came to offer a solution. Leave Seattle. I'll provide enough money for you and your children to live comfortably. But you must go and never come back. She pulled a check from her purse and slid it across the desk. The number written on it could have bought a house in nearly any city. Sarah stared at the check, then at Eleanor. Her blood boiled. You think I'd sell my children for money? She tore the check into pieces and let them fall to the floor like snowflakes. You can buy all of Seattle, Mrs. Blackwell, but not me. I will protect my children, even if it means standing against you or anyone else. Eleanor stood, her expression faltering for the first time before hardening again. You'll regret this, she said, and walked out, leaving Sarah breathless. When the door clicked shut, Sarah collapsed into her chair, tears slipping down her cheeks. The message from 6 years ago, the article about Ethan's engagement, and now this warning. It all came crashing back like a storm. She couldn't let her children grow up under the shadow of the Blackwell family. She had to leave, again. That night, Sarah began packing. In the small apartment, she folded the clothes of Damien, Daniel, and Daisy into suitcases, trying to hide her tears from them. We're going somewhere new, she told them when Damien asked, forcing a cheerful tone. There'll be prettier parks. But deep down, she knew. She wasn't just fleeing Eleanor. She was running from Ethan too, from the feelings he stirred inside her. Elsewhere, Ethan sat in his office, watching a security video Lena had forwarded him. He'd ordered surveillance after hearing Eleanor had visited Spark Vibe. The footage showed his mother entering Sarah's office and leaving with that same cold smile. His jaw clenched. Without a second thought, he drove to the Blackwell estate, where Eleanor sat in the parlor sipping tea, the chandelier light reflecting off her polished features. Mother, Ethan said, voice icy, restrained fury beneath every word. What did you say to Sarah? Eleanor calmly set down her teacup, unaffected. I did what was best for you, Ethan. That woman and those children will hold you back. You need someone like Sophia Langley, not a single mother with no status. Ethan stepped closer, fists clenched, his eyes blazing. You always have to control everything, don't you? 6 years ago, I thought Sarah left me. But now, I'm not so sure. She said I abandoned her. But that's not what happened. Did you do something? Did you drive her away, just like you're doing now? He waited, hoping for denial, but Eleanor remained silent. I don't need an answer now, Ethan said, voice quieter but unyielding. But hear me clearly. If you ever interfere with Sarah or my children again, I will resign from the family board. Blackwell Industries can go on without me, but I will not let you destroy my family again. Eleanor paled. It was the first time in years she had seen Ethan like this. Not as her obedient son, but as a man ready to walk away from it all. You don't understand, she said, voice trembling. I'm trying to protect you. Protect me? Ethan gave a bitter laugh. If those kids are mine, you stole 6 years from them. Don't make me choose, Mother, because you won't like my choice. He turned and walked away, leaving her gripping her teacup with white knuckles. Word of the confrontation reached Sarah quickly. Lena, who had witnessed part of the exchange through the glass doors, relayed the story to Mia. And Mia, out of kindness, told Sarah the next morning. Ethan defended you and the kids, Mia said gently. I've never seen him like that. Sarah didn't reply, but Mia's words echoed in her mind all day. That afternoon, she took the children to the park, where Ethan was waiting as usual. He sat on a bench, reading to Daisy, while Damien and Daniel played soccer nearby. As Sarah approached, Ethan stood, his eyes filled with worry. Sarah, I heard my mother came to see you. I'm sorry. I've made it clear she's not to interfere again. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see a powerful CEO or the man who had once broken her heart. She saw a father learning to love, a man who had stood up to his family for the sake of their children. Why? She asked softly. Why are you fighting for us? Ethan gave a sad smile, his eyes drifting to Daisy's laughter. Because I want to be the man they deserve. And because of you, Sarah. I don't know what really happened 6 years ago, but I want to make it right, even if you never give me the chance. Sarah turned away, silent tears trailing down her face. She didn't answer. But for the first time, she didn't call the children back early. She let Ethan keep reading to Daisy, let Damien drag him into their game, let Daniel proudly show off his robot. And in that golden Seattle sunset, she felt, perhaps, just perhaps, she didn't have to run anymore. Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story in the comments below. All your comments are the motivation for us to create better stories. Don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stories. Thank you very much. May 2025. The spring rains in Seattle had finally given way to summer sunlight, casting warm reflections off the glass towers downtown. Inside his office at Blackwell Industries, Ethan Blackwell sat still before his computer screen, his fingers clenched around a stack of documents. In front of him was a printed record from Blackwell Connect, the company's internal messaging app. A single knife-edge line of text stood out in bold. Sarah, we're not right for each other. Don't contact me again. The message had been sent from his account 6 years ago, but Ethan knew. He didn't write it. The truth had come to light earlier that morning, unraveling everything he thought he knew. It all started with an internal investigation. Helen Carter, Eleanor Blackwell's former secretary, had been arrested for embezzling over $1 million from the company's development fund. During questioning, investigators uncovered that Helen had used her high-level access to Blackwell Connect for more than financial fraud. Hidden in the logs was something far more personal. In August 2019, Helen had sent a message to Sarah Monroe from Ethan's account, mimicking his tone to perfection. Alongside that, the logs showed she had blocked every attempt Sarah made to reach Ethan afterward, including one desperate message. Ethan, I need to talk. Please. It was Lena, Ethan's assistant, who first brought the discovery to his desk. Mr. Blackwell, she said, her voice trembling as she handed him the file. We found this in Helen's activity logs. It looks like Mrs. Eleanor ordered her to do it. Ethan read every line, his face draining of color. His mother hadn't just threatened Sarah a few weeks ago. She had orchestrated the very misunderstanding that tore them apart 6 years ago. The fake message. The article announcing his engagement to Sophia Langley. It had all been part of a carefully laid plan to erase Sarah from his life. Ethan thought of Sarah's pained words in his office. You chose to leave me. He had suspected his mother's interference, but he had never imagined it was this cruel. Grabbing the file, he headed straight for Sarah's apartment. She had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how little it could change the past. Inside the small apartment, Sarah was gently tying Daisy's hair into pigtails, while Damien and Daniel played with building blocks on the floor. She tried to remain calm, but her thoughts still circled around last week's moment in the park. Ethan confronting his mother to defend her and the kids, the sincerity in his eyes when he said, I want to make this right. She wanted to believe him, but fear still lingered, that trusting him again would only lead to heartbreak. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Ethan standing there, his gray suit wrinkled, eyes shadowed with pain and resolve. Sarah, he said hoarsely, we need to talk. Just 5 minutes, please. She hesitated, glancing at the kids playing nearby, then nodded. She led him to the kitchen, where they could speak in private. What is it? She asked, her arms crossed like a shield. Ethan placed the file on the table and opened it to the page containing the fake message. 6 years ago, you got this from me, he said, pushing the paper toward her, telling you we weren't right for each other, that you shouldn't contact me again. I didn't send that, Sarah. Helen, my mother's secretary, did. She was ordered to, by my mother. Sarah stared at the page, her heart pounding. That message, the one that shattered her, now lay before her, accompanied by proof that it was a lie. She flipped to the next page and saw her own message. Ethan, I need to talk, please. She remembered sending it, remembered how her heart broke when she never heard back. She blocked my messages, she whispered, voice shaking. Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with remorse. I didn't know you tried to reach me, that you came to the office, that you left a note. Helen blocked it all. And my mother, he stopped rubbing his face. She thought she was protecting me, but she destroyed everything. I searched for you for weeks, Sarah. Called around, asked coworkers, but there was nothing. I thought you chose to leave. Sarah turned away, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. She remembered those lonely days in her rented apartment, pregnant with triplets, believing Ethan had chosen a different life. I was pregnant, Ethan, she choked. I was going to tell you, but then the message and the article about Sophia Langley. I thought you didn't want us. Ethan took a step forward, then stopped as she stepped back. I didn't know about the article, he said, voice cracking. That was my mother's doing too, trying to solidify a merger with Langley Tech. I was never engaged, not even close. He exhaled slowly, grief washing over his face. I don't deserve to be their father, Sarah. I wasn't there, but I didn't know. And now that I do, I want to be a better man. For them. For you. I want to make it right, even if I can only fix a fraction of what I've broken. Sarah looked at him, her eyes full of pain, and something else. Hope. She touched the printed message, the one that had haunted her every night for 6 years. It was a lie. All of it. She wanted to hate Ethan, to rage against his mother, to scream at the unfairness of it all. But she was tired. Tired of being angry. Tired of holding on to pain. More than anything, she wanted her children to be happy, and deep down she knew Ethan wanted that too. They don't know, she said at last, voice soft. They don't know you're their father, and I don't know how to tell them. She glanced toward the living room, where Daisy was giggling at something Damien had built. But if you want to be in their lives, Ethan, you have to earn it, not with words, with time. Ethan nodded, eyes glinting with determination. I will, no matter how long it takes. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to force anything. He simply stood there, waiting. Sarah wiped her tears and took a deep breath. Okay, she said, but this isn't forgiveness. This is a chance for the kids. She turned to look at them, and Ethan followed her gaze. His heart felt heavier than ever, but also lighter, freed by truth at last. The past couldn't be changed, but it could be the foundation for a new beginning. The truth had surfaced, and though it hurt, it was also the first step toward healing. Late May 2025. The first glow of summer was fading in Seattle, giving way to soft lavender skies as twilight settled over the city. Inside Sarah Monroe's modest apartment, the air felt heavy despite the sounds of laughter echoing from the living room. Damien, Daniel, and Daisy sat on the rug-building towers with blocks, but Sarah noticed Damien, her most sensitive child, glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking. Since her conversation with Ethan the week before, when the truth about the forged message was revealed, Sarah had tried to keep life normal, but the turmoil inside her was impossible to mask. She was caught between the pain of the past and the quiet hope Ethan had brought back into her life. And Damien, with the tender perception of a 5-year-old, sensed every ripple of that emotional current. Mommy, are you sad? Damien asked quietly while Sarah was washing dishes in the kitchen. She turned, forcing a small smile as she dried her hands on a dish towel. No, sweetheart. Mommy's just a little tired. But Damien wasn't convinced. He had seen her wiping away tears when she thought no one was looking. He had heard her sigh while staring at their family photo. And he remembered how Mr. Ethan had looked at her in the park, how she had gone silent after whatever he said. Damien didn't understand everything, but he knew Mr. Ethan mattered, and he wanted his mom to smile like she used to. That afternoon, when Sarah took the children to the neighborhood park, Damien quietly slipped away while she was helping Daisy retie her shoelaces. She didn't notice right away. Damien, tiny legs fueled by big determination, hurried toward the tall building he remembered. Blackwell Industries, just a few blocks away. He knew the path. He remembered the office where he had met Mr. Ethan. If I find him, maybe Mommy won't be sad anymore, he whispered, clutching the cloth doll Daisy had handed him. For safety. But Seattle wasn't kind to a 5-year-old alone. As he crossed a busy street, Damien tripped over the curb and fell hard onto the sidewalk. He tried to stand, but a sharp pain shot through his ankle. Tears welled up, and he began to cry. A middle-aged woman nearby rushed to his side, alarmed. She called the police while Damien sobbed, still holding the doll. "I need to find Mr. Ethan," he sniffled. Hearing the name and recognizing Blackwell Industries, the woman contacted the building. Word reached Ethan within minutes. He was in his office reviewing a report when Lena burst in, breathless. "Mr. Blackwell, Damien, he's been found on the street. He fell. The police are taking him to Seattle General Hospital." Ethan's heart stopped. He didn't think. He grabbed his coat and sprinted for his car, mind racing. "Damien, my son. Why would he go looking for me?" He called Sarah. No answer. She was probably already searching for him. At Seattle General, Ethan arrived just as Damien was being wheeled into the ER. The boy lay on the gurney, pale and teary-eyed, still clinging to the cloth doll. A calm-voiced doctor told Ethan that Damien had a dislocated ankle. Painful but not serious. He would need a cast and some rest. Ethan knelt by the bed, grasping the small hand in his. "Damien, it's me. I'm here. You're going to be okay." Damien blinked at him, his blue eyes so much like Ethan's glistening. "I wanted to find you, so Mommy wouldn't be sad," he whispered, before drifting into sleep from exhaustion and pain meds. Ethan's chest tightened. He sat there motionless, hands still clasped with his son's. He thought of Sarah, of how terrified she must be, of the 6 years he'd failed to be there for his children. If this is what being a father means, then I've failed them again and again. Sarah arrived at the hospital an hour later, out of breath, her hair wine-tossed from panic. She had been frantic after realizing Damien was gone, searching the park, calling the police, finally getting a call from the hospital. She'd left Daniel and Daisy with a friend and raced to the ER. When she burst through the doors, she found Ethan seated beside Damien's hospital bed, his hand still holding the boys. Damien lay asleep, his left leg in a fresh white cast, the cloth doll tucked beside him. "Sarah," Ethan said as he rose, his voice raw. "I didn't know he was coming to find me. She didn't let him finish. She rushed to the bed, wrapped her arms around Damien, and kissed his forehead through her tears. "My baby," she whispered. Then she turned to Ethan, her expression a mix of fury and relief. "You were here all night?" she asked, voice trembling. Ethan nodded. "I couldn't leave. He said he wanted to find me so you wouldn't be sad." He paused, emotion tightening his throat. "Sarah, I don't know how to fix everything I've broken, but I won't let them be hurt anymore." Sarah looked at him, and for the first time, she saw more than guilt. She saw a father. She thought of the truth he had brought to her last week, the forged message, the apology that came not with excuses, but with humility. She remembered the way he told stories to Daisy, played soccer with Daniel, and now had stayed beside Damien through the night. She drew a slow breath, voice quiet but steady. "Ethan, you're their father. I can't deny that anymore." The words struck like a blade, cutting but also freeing. Ethan blinked, his tears finally falling. He didn't speak, afraid to ruin the fragile moment. Sarah took the seat beside the bed. Ethan sat next to her. They didn't speak of love. They didn't make promises. They simply sat side by side, watching over their sleeping son. Then, without thinking, Sarah reached out, and Ethan took her hand. His was warm, trembling slightly in hers. In the stillness of that hospital room, under soft, fluorescent lights, they found something unspoken. Not the love they once had, but the love they now shared for their children, and perhaps the beginning of something new. June 2025. The gentle summer sun filtered through the trees in a quiet backyard on the outskirts of Seattle. Sarah Monroe stood by a wooden picnic table, arranging cookies and fruit juice, her gaze drifting toward her 3 children laughing and running on the grass. Damien, his ankle now fully healed, was trying to teach Daniel how to fly a kite, while Daisy sat on a blanket, rocking her cloth doll gently in her lap. Beside her, Ethan Blackwell, dressed not in his usual powerful suit, but in a simple t-shirt and jeans, was tending to a small campfire, preparing marshmallows for roasting. Today marked their first family picnic, a fragile, hopeful step forward after months of turbulence. Just last week, Ethan and Sarah had walked into a law office together to finalize the adoption paperwork. With Sarah's full consent, Ethan had legally become the father of Damien, Daniel, and Daisy. The process was straightforward, but when Sarah signed her name, a wave of relief and fear washed over her. "This is for the children," she'd said, her voice steady but her eyes cautious. Ethan had only nodded, his expression resolute. He knew legal parenthood was more than ink and paper. It was a vow to be there every single day, despite the wreckage of the past. Now, under the lavender hues of a Seattle sunset, Sarah watched as Ethan gently showed Daisy how to skewer a marshmallow on a bamboo stick. His voice was soft, patient. "Easy now, sweetheart. Don't let it fall." Daisy giggled, her cheeks glowing pink. Sarah sank onto the blanket, hugging a pillow to her chest. Her heart felt warm and tangled. She had opened her heart, admitted Ethan was the children's father. But the fear of being hurt again lingered like a shadow. Ethan caught her gaze and walked over, sitting beside her, keeping just enough space to let her breathe. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded but then sighed, her eyes following the children. "I was just thinking about everything," she murmured. 6 years, Ethan. I raised them alone, in a tiny town, working at a craft store just to afford formula, diapers, and Daisy's medicine when she got sick. There were nights I didn't sleep. When Damien had a fever or Daniel cried for a toy I couldn't afford, I did everything I could to make them smile. But sometimes I wondered if I was enough. Ethan listened in silence, his grip tightening on the bamboo stick in his hand. He wanted to say something, anything, but he knew this wasn't a moment for defense. It was a moment to listen, to understand. Sarah's voice softened. "I used to think you abandoned us. That belief made me strong, but it also made me afraid. Afraid to trust again, afraid to let anyone close." Ethan looked at her, his eyes gentle. "Sarah, I can't change the past. I can't erase the nights you spent alone or the fear you carried. But I'm here now, and I'll do everything I can to make sure you and the kids never have to carry that fear again." Sarah turned to him, her gaze flickering with emotion. "You're not the man I loved back then," she said, her tone honest, not cruel. "You've changed, Ethan. You're no longer that dreamer in a polished office. And I'm not that naive girl who believed love fixed everything." Ethan offered a bittersweet smile, the fading sunlight casting gold on his features. "You're the reason I want to be a better man, Sarah. Not just for the kids, but for you. You gave me a family, a second chance. I can't promise to be perfect, but I promise I won't leave." His words drifted over her like a warm breeze, stirring something deep within. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she leaned gently against his shoulder, a simple gesture, but one that said everything. Ethan didn't move, afraid to shatter the moment. They sat there in silence, shoulder to shoulder, watching their children roast marshmallows. Damien's laughter rang through the yard. Daniel waved his half-burnt marshmallow like a trophy, and Daisy cradled her doll beside the fire. In that quiet embrace beneath the soft sky, Sarah felt something she hadn't known in years. She wasn't alone anymore. Seattle, July 2025. The city basked in golden sunshine, birds chirping softly in the trees. In the backyard of Sarah Monroe's apartment, a simple birthday party was in full swing for Damien, Daniel, and Daisy, now officially 6 years old. A wooden table draped in a sky blue cloth held a chocolate cake. Colorful balloons were tied to the chairs, and a handmade paper garland fluttered gently in the breeze. Ethan stood at the grill, flipping burgers, while Sarah sliced fruit nearby, her gaze drifting lovingly over the children as they ran through the grass with a few of their friends from daycare. It wasn't extravagant, but it overflowed with love. And that, above all, was what Sarah and Ethan wanted their children to feel. Ethan had spent weeks planning not just the party, but something far more important. Since their picnic a month earlier, he had felt a shift in Sarah. The wall between them was no longer stone. It was a door, slightly ajar. She was still guarded, still afraid of the past. But he also knew something else. He couldn't imagine his life without her, or without the kids. Today he was going to risk everything. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the sky in soft shades of lavender and gold. The party reached its final moment. Gift giving. Ethan knelt before the children, presenting each with a small, silver-wrapped box. "These are special gifts," he said, voice deep and warm. Damien opened his first. His eyes widened with joy when he found a small silver ring inside, finely engraved with the letter D. Daniel and Daisy followed, each finding their own tiny ring, their initials delicately carved into the silver bands. "This is a promise from your dad," Ethan said, his voice catching slightly as he looked at them. "I'll always be here, no matter what." The children squealed with delight, slipping the rings onto their tiny fingers and running off to show Sarah. She smiled at their excitement, but as she approached Ethan by the cake table, her gaze held quiet curiosity. "Why rings?" she asked softly. Ethan drew a slow breath and reached into his pocket. "I'm glad you asked." He pulled out a fourth box, this one smaller, velvet, unmistakably different. Then before she could respond, he dropped to one knee. Gasps and tiny cheers rippled through the children as Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Ethan opened the box to reveal a fourth silver ring, simple, elegant, and glowing softly in the twilight. "Sarah," he began, voice shaking slightly but full of resolve, "I left you alone for far too long. 6 years. I wasn't there when you needed me most. I wasn't there for our kids. But now I know you're everything. Not just the mother of my children, but the person I want beside me every day. If you'll give me the chance, not just to be a father, but to be your husband, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making you and the kids happy." Sarah stood frozen, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, one hand over her mouth. She looked at Ethan, then at the children, watching them with wide, hopeful eyes. She remembered the years of loneliness, the pain, the silence, but she also remembered the past few months. Ethan reading to Daisy, playing soccer with Damien, teaching Daniel about circuits and screens, and sitting all night in a hospital room just to hold their son's hand. He wasn't perfect, but he had changed, and so had she. She reached out her hand, her voice breaking. "Yes, Ethan, I say yes." Cheers erupted from the children and a few neighbors. Ethan stood and slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms. Sarah leaned against his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt, but her smile shone brighter than it had in years. The party ended with the whole family gathered around the birthday cake. Damien, Daniel, and Daisy blew out the candles in unison, their laughter echoing in the warm air. Sarah sat beside Ethan, her fingers laced with his, the silver ring gleaming under the twilight. They looked at the children, then at each other. And in that moment, they both knew. This was home, a real family built not from perfection, but from pain that had healed, love that had endured, and a second chance they had both chosen to take. Fridays in October in New York were always a battlefield. The honking of cars stuck on Fifth Avenue mixed with the clicking of high heels on the sidewalk and the rushed curses of office workers. Sierra Lane, 27, darted through the crowd, her hastily tied brown hair a mess, clutching her iPad like a lifeline. She was late, again, for an important interview, and the editor-in-chief of City Pulse, Nora No-Nonsense Baxter, had threatened to fire her if she didn't finish the Power Players Behind the City article by tonight's deadline. "Just one more source," Sierra muttered, slipping past a delivery guy who nearly collided with her. She needed a big name, someone who would make her piece stand out among the dozens of bland articles about rising stars and politicians. But the last name on her list, a real estate developer named Gerald Klein, had canceled on her at the last minute with the excuse of a meeting. Sierra didn't buy it. More likely, he was afraid she'd dig too deep into his shady projects. She stopped in front of a sleek glass tower on Wall Street, the sign Cross Corp gleaming in the afternoon sun. According to a reliable source, Gerald Klein was meeting here today. "If I can't interview him, maybe I can squeeze a few quotes out of someone important," Sierra told herself, smoothing out her wrinkled navy blazer. She had no invitation, no appointment, but when had a journalist ever let that stop them? Inside the lobby, the chill of air conditioning and the scent of expensive perfume hung thick in the air. The receptionist, a woman with a stiff smile, looked at Sierra like a stray cat had wandered into a banquet. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, fingers flying over the keyboard. Sierra gave her most confident smile. "Sierra Lane, City Pulse. I'm here to see Gerald Klein. He's expecting me." A bold-faced lie, but improvising was part of the job. The receptionist frowned, checking the screen. "There's no appointment with Mr. Klein today. You'll have to—" "Just tell me what floor he's on," Sierra cut in, leaning across the counter, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "I promise I won't be long." The receptionist sighed, clearly not in the mood to argue. 42nd floor, main conference room, but you'll need a pass for the elevator." Sierra winked, flashing an old press badge from a different event. "Already got one!" She rushed toward the elevators before the woman could look closer. The 42nd floor felt like another world. Polished marble floors, frosted glass doors, and a silence so heavy Sierra could hear her heartbeat. She walked down the hallway, peeking through doors, searching for any sign of Gerald Klein. At the end of the corridor, a set of double doors was slightly ajar, warm light spilling out. She heard a deep, commanding voice inside. "This is it," she whispered and pushed the door open without knocking. The conference room was massive, with a long ebony table and luxurious leather chairs. But there was no Gerald Klein. Only one man stood at the head of the table, tall, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit, black hair neatly combed, and piercing, icy blue eyes fixed on her as if she'd just thrown a grenade into the room. Behind him, a massive screen showed financial charts, and several high-level staff, all now silent, turned to look at her. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice low but razor-sharp. "And how did you get in here?" Sierra swallowed hard, feeling like she'd just walked into a lion's den, but she wasn't the kind to back down. "Sierra Lane, City Pulse," she said, standing tall. "I'm here to see Gerald Klein. Where is he?" The man narrowed his eyes, scanning her from head to toe, not with admiration, but as if analyzing a threat. "Gerald Klein isn't here," he said coldly, "and you just walked into a confidential cross-corp meeting. Who let you in?" Sierra shrugged, keeping her tone calm. "The door wasn't locked. I took that as an invitation." A few staff members chuckled, but the man didn't. He stepped forward, every move radiating authority. "You're a reporter," he said, like the word itself was an insult. "Let me guess. You're digging for a scandal to land a front-page story?" Sierra crossed her arms, standing her ground. "Let me guess. You're the type of CEO who wears expensive suits and thinks he owns the world?" The room fell silent again, frozen. One staffer coughed nervously. But the man, whom Sierra now recognized as Damian Cross, CEO of CrossCorp, thanks to the nameplate on the table, just stared at her, a flicker of something in his eyes. Anger, but also curiosity. "You have 10 seconds to leave," he said, his voice low and chilling, "or I'll call security." Sierra smiled even as her heart pounded. 10 seconds? Generous. But I'm not going anywhere. I need a story, and you seem worth writing about. Damien tilted his head as if she'd told a joke that wasn't funny. "You want a story? Here's your story. CrossCorp doesn't do business with spies posing as journalists. Get out, or I'll make sure you never set foot in this building again." "Spy?" Sierra scoffed, her voice sharp. "I'm a journalist, not James Bond, and if you think that big boss voice of yours can scare me, you're mistaken." They stood there only a few feet apart, eyes locked like duelists. Neither flinched. Finally, Damien raised his hand and signaled for the staff to leave. "Meeting adjourned," he said, without breaking eye contact. Once the room cleared, he stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You want to play this game? Fine. But remember this. I don't lose." Sierra felt a jolt rush through her. Not fear, but something strange, like she'd just triggered something far bigger than she expected. "Good," she shot back with a defiant smile, "because neither do I." She turned to leave, but not before glancing back one last time. Damian Cross was still standing there, watching her, not with anger, but with something deeper, as if she had just walked into his life, and neither of them knew how much it was about to change. Sierra Lane stormed out of the CrossCorp tower, her sneakers slamming against the Wall Street pavement as if she could stomp out the fury boiling inside her. The October wind whipped through her hastily tied brown hair, but she didn't care. In her mind, the image of Damian Cross, navy suit, ice blue eyes, and that deep, commanding voice kept haunting her. "Spy in a reporter's disguise," she muttered, mimicking his voice before scoffing. "Dictator in a suit, more like it." She jumped onto the subway heading toward City Pulse's Midtown office, clutching her iPad filled with notes from the failed interview. Gerald Klein hadn't been there, and instead of a story, she'd walked straight into a clash with the most notorious CEO in New York. A man rumored to silence entire boardrooms with just one look. But Sierra wasn't afraid of him. Damian Cross might make the world tremble, but she was a journalist, and journalists didn't back down. The newsroom was its usual chaos. Phones ringing, keys clacking furiously, and the burnt smell of coffee wafting from the corner machine. Sierra collapsed into her chair, opened her laptop, and started typing like a storm unleashed. "Damian Cross, the tyrant behind the glass fortress," she typed, her fingers pounding the keyboard. She wrote about CrossCorp as an impenetrable fortress, about Damian's cold stare as if he owned the souls of everyone in that boardroom. She didn't have enough material to turn the piece into a major hit, but at the very least she could get under his skin. She was halfway through describing the CEO's condescending smirk when a voice as sharp as a blade cut through the air behind her. "Lane, my office, now." Sierra sighed, shut her laptop, and dragged herself into Nora Baxter's glass-walled office. The editor-in-chief, 50, with cropped silver hair and steel-piercing eyes, sat behind her desk holding a folded newspaper. "Sit," Nora commanded, pointing to the chair. Sierra obeyed, feeling like a kid summoned to the principal's office. "I heard you barged into CrossCorp today," Nora began, her voice calm but lethal, "and had a shouting match with Damian Cross, in the middle of a closed meeting." Sierra shrugged, trying to stay cool. "I didn't barge in. The door was open, and he called me a spy, so I fired back. A little." "A little?" Nora raised an eyebrow. "You called him a suit-wearing tyrant in front of his entire executive team." Sierra stiffened. "Who told you that?" "Doesn't matter," Nora said, tossing the paper onto her desk. "What matters is that you just pissed off the man who's invested millions in the media conglomerate that owns City Pulse. Damian Cross isn't just the CEO of CrossCorp. He's one of our major shareholders. And this morning he called and demanded you never set foot in his building again." Sierra felt the blood drain from her face. "Shareholder? Damian Cross? Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because you didn't ask," Nora replied dryly. "And because I expected a journalist like you to do some research before walking into a minefield. But now we have a bigger issue. Cross agreed to lift the ban on one condition." Sierra narrowed her eyes. "What condition?" Nora slid a fax across the desk. "He wants you to return to CrossCorp. He's agreed to grant you an interview if you serve as his temporary assistant for 7 days. His word, so she can understand who I really am." Sierra laughed, but the smile died when she saw Nora wasn't joking. "You're kidding, right? An assistant? To that guy? I'm a journalist, not a secretary." "And I'm an editor, not your mother," Nora snapped. "You want to keep your job? Go back to CrossCorp, work 7 days, and bring me the interview the whole of New York will read. Or pack your desk. Your call." Sierra clenched her fists, fury crashing through her like a wave. She wanted to throw the fax in Nora's face, wanted to scream that Damian Cross didn't get to humiliate her, but she needed this job. She clawed her way up from intern to full-time reporter with blood, sweat, and caffeine. She wasn't going to let one arrogant CEO ruin that. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. 7 days, I'll do it. But I won't be fetching his coffee." Nora smiled for the first time during the entire meeting. "Good. And Sierra? Don't call him a tyrant again, at least not to his face." The next afternoon, Sierra stood in front of the CrossCorp tower like a gladiator stepping into the arena. She wore a crisp white blouse, black slacks, and had her hair tied up high, ready to face Damian Cross. The same receptionist from before handed her a temporary staff badge with a look that was half sympathy, half intrigue. 42nd floor, the woman said. Mr. Cross is expecting you. The elevator ride felt like it lasted a century. When the doors opened, Sierra stepped into the familiar marble hallway, her heartbeat pounding. A young assistant with blonde hair and a hurried walk led her to a corner office. A sprawling space with windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Damian Cross sat behind his desk, dressed in a gray suit, fingers gliding across his laptop. He looked up as she entered, those icy eyes unreadable. Miss Lane, he said, voice deep like a judge handing out a sentence. Didn't think you'd come back. Sierra folded her arms and gave him a mocking smile. I'm not the quitting type, Mr. Cross. 7 days, right? I'll do the job, but don't expect me to fetch your coffee or press your suits. Damian stood, taller than she remembered, and stepped forward, stopping just a few feet from her. Good, he said, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Because I don't need coffee. I need you to prove you're more than just a troublemaking journalist. For 7 days, you'll see how I run things. If you survive, you get your interview. If not, he shrugged, you know where the exit is. Sierra stared straight into his eyes, unblinking. Survive? You think I'm scared of you? I've interviewed drug lords, Mr. Cross. You're just a guy in an overpriced suit. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that startled her. We'll see, he said, then pointed to a small desk in the corner. Start by reading and summarizing this financial report. I need it in 2 hours. Welcome to Cross Corp, Miss Lane. Sierra sat down, biting her tongue to keep from snapping back. She watched him return to his desk, eyes already back on the screen, as if she were just another item on his to-do list. But she felt it, a spark, a challenge. Damian Cross might be the man everyone feared, but Sierra Lane wasn't everyone, and she was going to make damn sure he remembered her name. On Monday morning, Sierra Lane stepped onto the 42nd floor of Cross Corp, feeling like a gladiator walking into the Roman arena. The temporary staff badge around her neck clinked like a reminder. She was only a guest in Damian Cross's glass and steel fortress. She wore a crisp blue blouse, black slacks, and flats, an outfit carefully chosen to look professional and to run if necessary. 7 days, she muttered, smoothing her hair. 7 days to survive the suit-wearing tyrant and bring home the interview of the century. Damian's office was massive, its windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, the atmosphere as cold and sterile as a laboratory. He sat behind his desk, dressed in a dark gray suit, those ice-blue eyes scanning her as she walked in. You're on time, he said, his deep voice devoid of emotion. I thought you'd quit after day 1. Sierra smiled, though she wanted to throw her badge in his face. Quit? You don't know me, Mr. Cross. Assign the task. I'm ready. Damian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement flashing in his eyes. Good, he said, pushing a thick stack of papers across the desk. These are the financial reports from 4 of Cross Corp's European branches. Summarize them, flag any inconsistencies, and present your findings at the 3 p.m. meeting. You have 5 hours. Sierra stared at the pile, her heart sinking. She was a journalist, not an accountant. But Damian's gaze, challenging, almost mocking, made her clench her fists. Fine, she said, dragging the papers toward her. But if I find anything, you owe me an answer for the interview. He smirked, a short, sharp sound. Find something first, Miss Lane. Then we'll talk. The Cross Corp environment was like a battleground without bullets. Employees moved like machines, firing off emails filled with phrases like optimized deliverables and Q4 KPIs, like it was their native tongue. Sierra was given a small desk in the open office next to a soft-spoken assistant named Emily, who whispered, No one survives more than 3 days doing Cross's tasks. Sierra just shrugged. They're not me. The first assignment was a nightmare. Financial reports crammed with numbers, charts, and terms she barely remembered from Econ 101. But Sierra didn't fold. She opened her laptop, Googled every term, called a finance analyst friend, and took notes like a detective on a murder case. By noon, she spotted a suspicious expense in the Paris branch. $500,000 listed as strategic consulting with no attached invoice. She grinned, typed a sharp summary, and walked into the 3 p.m. meeting with the confidence of someone who just cracked the code. Damian sat at the head of the table, surrounded by tense executives. Sierra presented her findings in a clear voice, pointing to the shady entry. I'm no expert, she said, glancing at Damien, but $500,000 for consulting without a contract? Sounds like someone's hiding something. Silence fell. One exec coughed, pale-faced. Damien stared at her, unreadable, not angry, but something closer to reluctant acknowledgement. Good, he said. I'll have it investigated. What else? Sierra slid the report across the table. It's all there. Read it, if you can find time between being a dictator. A few execs chuckled, but shut up immediately when Damien shot them a glance. He flipped through the summary and nodded. Not bad, Ms. Lane, tomorrow. I need a presentation for our Japanese partners. In English, but culturally correct. 8 a.m. Sierra bit her lip to hold back a curse. She knew nothing about Japanese business culture, but Damien's expression said it all. He was waiting for her to fail. The next 7 days were relentless warfare. Damien hurled assignments at her like grenades, analyzing a 200-page legal contract, coordinating an international summit schedule, even replying to his emails in the official cross-corp tone. Read cold and emotionless. Every task was a test meant to break her. But Sierra didn't break. She hit back with sharp wit and a journalist's eye for detail. When Damien asked her to summarize a contract, she didn't just summarize. She flagged a vague clause that posed a legal risk, forcing CrossCorp's legal team to revise the draft. When he made her reply to a partner's email, she added a subtle quip that got them a smiling response. And though Damien didn't admit it, he was clearly impressed. Once, she accidentally lingered outside his office and overheard a tense call with an investor. She remembered his exact phrasing and used the same negotiation tactic with a vendor, saving CrossCorp 10 grand. By day 5, Emily whispered to her during lunch, "You're the first one who hasn't cried after a cross assignment. Are you a witch or something?" Sierra laughed. "Number, I just hate losing." But she didn't win every round. On day 6, Damien handed her an impossible task. Create a market report on Asia in 24 hours. A project fit for someone with an MBA and a death wish. Sierra worked past midnight, eyes burning, only for Damien to glance at the report in the morning and say, "Not detailed enough." He tossed it onto the desk. "Do it again." Sierra shot to her feet, rage flaring. "Again? You think I'm a damn printer? I stayed up all night for this, and all you say is, not enough? Newsflash, Damien Cross. You are not the king of the universe." He looked at her, unblinking, but the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Then prove you don't need me to hold your hand, Miss Lane Redowit, or walk." Sierra took a deep breath, turned on her heel, and stormed back to her desk, fueled by sheer stubbornness. She rewrote the report like a woman on a mission, like a reporter who once followed a corrupt senator across 3 states. She turned it in at the end of the day. This time, Damien just nodded. "Acceptable," he said. But for the first time, his eyes held something new, something that looked a lot like respect. Sierra Lane entered the 7th day of her 7-day war at CrossCorp with tired eyes but a blazing spirit. Over the past 6 days, she had survived Damien Cross's impossible tasks, from financial analysis to vendor negotiations, and proved she wasn't just the troublemaking journalist he once called her. Today, her final assignment was to accompany Damien to a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel, where CrossCorp was sponsoring a scholarship fund. "Don't embarrass me," Damien had said that morning, his ice blue eyes sweeping over her. But Sierra swore she saw something else in them, not mockery, expectation. Now she stood in front of the mirror in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, wearing an emerald evening gown, her brown hair falling in soft waves. "I'm not his assistant," she muttered, smoothing the fabric. "I'm a journalist, and tonight I'm going to dig up a few secrets on Damien Cross." But deep down, she knew her curiosity wasn't just about the article. It was about him, the cold CEO, with his rare smile and eyes that seemed to hold a story untold, was throwing her off more than she wanted to admit. The Plaza Hotel glittered with chandelier light, filled with the sounds of violins and the rich scent of fine wine. Sierra entered the ballroom clutching her clutch like a shield, feeling like a fish among sharks. Business moguls, politicians, and TV personalities moved with the confidence of people who belonged here. At the center stood Damien, black suit tailored to perfection, power radiating from him effortlessly. He shook hands with a sponsor, his polite smile not quite reaching his eyes. When he spotted Sierra, he nodded and gestured for her to come closer. "Miss Lane," he said, voice low and smooth. "You look not bad." Sierra raised an eyebrow and offered a teasing smile. "Thanks for the half-hearted compliment, Mr. Cross. You're not bad either, if you ignore the part where you look like you'd freeze the whole room." He chuckled, a short sound, but enough to startle her. "You have a task tonight," he said, handing her a list. "Take notes on the key donors, observe who's saying what, and report back to me before the event ends. Don't mess this up." Sierra glanced at the list and bit her lip to stop a retort. "Taking notes? I'm not your secretary." "No," he replied, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You're a temporary assistant. One day left, Miss Lane. Don't ruin your streak." She turned on her heel, muttering something about dictators in suits, but began the task with the focus of a seasoned reporter. She moved through the crowd, listening in on conversations and jotting down notes on her phone. One elderly donor, a silver-haired woman in dazzling pearls, confided that Cross Corp had funded scholarships for hundreds of underprivileged students in the Bronx, but Damien insisted his name stay out of it. "He doesn't want anyone to know," the woman whispered, her eyes glowing. "But I know. That man has a heart. He just hides it well." Sierra froze mid-type, surprised. Damien Cross, the man she thought only cared about power and profits, secretly funding education? She looked across the room and saw him talking to a city councilman, but his eyes were distant, like his mind was somewhere else. She kept digging, casually chatting with a former Cross Corp employee who shared another story. 2 years ago, a factory worker was injured on the job. The partner company blamed the worker and threatened to sue. Damien shut down the lawsuit, paid the medical bills, and kept the man on staff. "He didn't say anything," the employee recalled. "Just told us to do the right thing. But everyone in that factory has been loyal to him ever since." What Sierra felt wasn't triumph. It wasn't even excitement over uncovering a good lead. It was confusion. Damien Cross wasn't just the cold-hearted CEO she'd imagined. He had layers, pieces she didn't yet understand. The gala stretched late into the night, the lights dimming as the orchestra played a soft piano piece. Tired from hours of observing and scribbling, Sierra slipped into a quiet corner with a glass of wine. She scanned the room looking for Damien and found him not at the center of attention, but alone in a corner near an old piano. He wasn't playing. He just sat, fingers brushing the keys like he was remembering a melody. His eyes were distant, and there was a sadness to him, something untouchable. Sierra stood, unsure what she was doing, and walked over. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Didn't know you played piano. Or is that just a prop to make you look more mysterious?" Damien looked up, startled for a moment, then his expression returned to its usual coolness. "Miss Lane," he said, "done with your observations? Or are you writing a piece on my taste in music?" She sat beside him without asking. "Not yet," she said with a faint smile. "But I'm curious. You fund scholarships, protect workers, and now sit here like a man who's lost everything. Who are you, Damien Cross? Really?" He stared at her for so long she began to wonder if she'd gone too far. Then he turned back to the piano, his fingers pressing a single low, sorrowful note. "You're a journalist," he said quietly. "You think you can dig into everything, but not every story is meant to be told." Sierra tilted her head, unflinching. "Maybe, but I think your story is worth hearing, if you'll let me." Damien didn't answer. He stood, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked away, leaving Sierra with the piano and a strange feeling in her chest. She watched him disappear into the crowd, her heart beating faster than usual. Damien Cross wasn't just her biggest professional challenge. He was a mystery, and for the first time, Sierra wasn't sure if she wanted to uncover him to write a story, or to truly understand the man beneath the frost. Sierra Lane sat in Damien Cross's corner office, the golden glow of Manhattan casting shifting patterns across her face through the massive windows. The 7-day stint as his temporary assistant had come to an end, and today Damien was keeping his word. An interview. But the atmosphere wasn't that of a typical interview. There was no recorder, no press presence, just Sierra, her notebook open on her lap, and Damien sitting across from her in a pale gray suit. His ice blue eyes no longer seemed sharp. They were deep now, clouded, as if hiding something he didn't want to bring to the surface. Over the past week, Sierra had seen glimpses of a different Damien, an anonymous scholarship donor, a silent protector of factory workers, a man who sat alone by a piano with sorrow etched in his gaze. But one thing remained unclear: why he despised the media so deeply. She needed to know, not just for the article, but because she wanted to understand him. "Mr. Cross," she began gently, "I fulfilled your 7-day challenge. I think I've earned the truth. Why do you hate the media so much?" Damien froze, the tapping of his fingers on the desk ceasing. He looked at her, so long and so still that Sierra feared she'd crossed a line. Then he stood, walking slowly to the window, turning his back to her. "You don't give up, do you, Miss Lane?" His voice was low, bitter. "That's why you hired me," she replied with a faint smile. "And I'm asking not for a story. I just want to understand you." He turned back around, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes. Grief. Damien returned to his seat, fingers interlaced, taking a long breath. "Fine," he said, "but don't expect me to repeat this." Sierra nodded. Her pen hovered, but she didn't write. She simply listened. "When I was in college," Damien began, his voice steady but hollow, "my mother was a human rights lawyer. She fought for people no one else would protect. But one day, Urban Voice ran a story on her, claimed she took bribes, exploited cases for personal gain. All lies, a smear campaign by a corporation she was suing. They had no evidence, but the headline was enough to destroy her." Sierra's heart clenched. She wanted to speak, but Damien's voice, now faintly trembling, held her in place. She was fired. Friends turned their backs. Charities she supported stopped returning her calls. She spiraled into depression. I stayed close, tried to help, but I was a 20-year-old kid, drowning in exams and startup dreams. I didn't see how far she'd fallen. He paused, voice thickening. "A year later, she killed herself. I found her in the living room, with a note, apologizing, saying she was sorry for disappointing me." Silence. Damien stared at the floor. Sierra felt her throat tighten, tears threatening to rise, but she held them back. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I can't imagine what that was like." He gave a dry laugh, void of joy. "Don't be. I learned my lesson. The media doesn't care about the truth. They care about headlines, about what sells. After she died, I swore I'd never let them hurt anyone like that again." He looked up, his gaze harder now. "That's why I invested in Global Media Group, the parent company of City Pulse. I wanted to control it, reform it, hold it accountable. I didn't know Urban Voice had merged with City Pulse until years later. When I found out, I didn't pull my funding. I thought maybe I could change it from within." Sierra's breath caught. He didn't know. She set her pen down, pulse racing. "You've done more than I ever expected," she said softly. "Thank you for telling me." Damien studied her, eyes softening. "You're a journalist, Miss Lane. I'm not sure I can trust you, but you're not like them. At least I hope not." The words struck her like a blade. She stood slowly and closed her notebook. "I promise I won't use any of this without your permission. I need time to think." He gave a small nod. She left the office feeling like she'd walked out of a storm without an umbrella. Back in her Brooklyn apartment, Sierra opened her laptop and logged into the City Pulse archives. She typed in the headline she already half knew would exist. There it was. "Human rights lawyer accused of bribery," published by Urban Voice 15 years ago, before the merger with City Pulse. She had been 12 when the article came out, still years away from even dreaming of being a journalist. And yet, there was the modern City Pulse logo sitting above the archived article. It felt like an accusation. A brand she worked for had once destroyed the most important person in Damien's life. Sierra collapsed into her chair, hands trembling. She wanted to tell him the truth. She wanted to apologize, not as a representative of the press, but as herself. But revealing that she worked for the successor of Urban Voice could shatter the fragile trust between them. Trust she had spent 7 hard-earned days building. Being a journalist meant chasing the truth. But for the first time, Sierra wasn't sure if the truth was worth the price. She buried her face in her hands and whispered into the darkness, "What the hell am I supposed to do?" Sierra Lane stood in the small regional airport in Burlington, Vermont, staring through the frost-blurred windows as a snowstorm howled across the Adirondacks like a beast unleashed. The flight status board blinked red. Canceled. Inclement weather. She sighed, clutching her backpack tighter, feeling as if fate had decided to mock her. What was meant to be a simple interview with an environmental scientist for City Pulse, a distraction from the emotional whirlwind left by last week's conversation with Damian Cross, had turned into being stranded in a snow-locked airport. And standing just a few feet away, tapping on his phone with that signature cold detachment, was none other than Damian Cross himself. "You've got to be kidding me," Sierra muttered before stepping closer. "What are you doing here?" Damian looked up, his ice blue gaze flickering with surprise before settling back into practiced neutrality. "I could ask you the same, Miss Lane," he replied in that steady, unreadable tone. "I had a meeting with a partner on a clean energy initiative. And you? Digging up scandals in the snow now?" Sierra crossed her arms, masking her surprise with sarcasm. "Interviewing a scientist. Not everyone lives for drama like you, Mr. Cross." He raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching into the smallest smirk. A look she'd grown to recognize over their bizarre week together. "Good, because I'm in no mood to spar with a reporter today." But fate had other plans. The gate agent soon announced that no flights would be departing for at least the next 24 hours. And as luck or mischief would have it, the nearby town had only one inn left with available rooms. After a brief, tense back and forth with the receptionist about who arrived first, Sierra and Damian somehow ended up sharing the last room, a tiny, outdated space with a single double bed, a worn armchair, and a scratched-up kitchenette. "Perfect," Sierra muttered, tossing her backpack onto the armchair. "Trapped in a 10 by 10 box with a suit-wearing tyrant. Anyone want to trade lives?" Damian took off his coat, hung it neatly, and glanced at her with cool detachment. "You're welcome to sleep in the hallway. I'm not stopping you." Sierra shot him a glare but stayed quiet. The wind rattling the windows was cold enough to freeze her sarcasm. They settled into an unspoken truce, Sierra claiming the armchair with her notepad, Damian scrolling through emails from the bed. As night fell and the cold deepened, the kitchenette became their only hope for warmth. "I'll cook," Damian said abruptly, rising like he was calling a board meeting. Sierra blinked at him in disbelief as he rifled through the cabinets, producing a box of pasta, a can of tomato sauce, and a few dried herbs. "Don't look so shocked," he said without turning. "I've lived alone since I was 18. I can cook." For once, her laugh wasn't mocking. "Didn't think you knew how to do anything that didn't involve contracts or terrifying interns?" He glanced at her, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "You'd be surprised, Miss Lane." They ate at the tiny table, lit by a single candle provided by the inn. The meal was simple, pasta and tomato sauce, but surprisingly good. Sierra had to admit, Damian Cross could cook. After dinner, they sat across from each other, sipping cheap red wine from mismatched mugs. Silence stretched, no longer uncomfortable. It began to melt into something gentler, something resembling a real conversation. Sierra found herself telling stories about her childhood in suburban New Jersey, stealing newspapers off neighbors' porches just to read the headlines. Her dream to be a journalist so she could speak for people who had no voice. Damian listened quietly, intently, not interrupting once. Then she turned the question on him. "What about you?" she asked softly. "Before you became this?" She gestured to the confident, powerful exterior he always wore. Damian stared into the candle flame, its glow dancing in his eyes. "I was just a kid trying to prove I wasn't worthless," he said, voice low. "After my mom died, I worked like hell to build CrossCorp, to make sure no one could crush me the way they crushed her. But sometimes I wonder if it was worth it." Her chest tightened. The confession was raw, unguarded. She wanted to tell him everything about Urban Voice, about how City Pulse inherited that legacy. But the truth lodged in her throat like a stone. Instead, she set down her mug and leaned in slightly. "It was worth it," she said gently. "You've helped people. Those scholarships, the factory worker, even me in some twisted way. You're not worthless, Damien." He looked at her, and for the first time, his eyes weren't cold. They were warm, vulnerable, aching. The space between them seemed to vanish. Then, without a word, his lips touched hers. A kiss. Light, slow, almost hesitant, like a question neither of them wanted to ask aloud. Sierra kissed him back, her hand finding his shoulder, feeling the warmth through his sweater. In that moment, there was no City Pulse, no Urban Voice, no ghosts of past betrayals. There were only two people lost in a snowstorm, finding something they hadn't expected. But when the candle burned out, Damien pulled away. His eyes returned to distance. "We shouldn't have," he murmured, standing and turning his back. "You're a journalist. I can't." Sierra felt something twist in her chest, but she forced a nod. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "Let's pretend it didn't happen." The next morning, the storm had passed, and Damien was back to his usual, unreadable self. They left the inn in silence, only the sound of snow crunching beneath their boots. As she watched him climb into a black SUV, Sierra's heart felt heavier than she expected. That kiss had crossed a line they were never supposed to blur. But even if Damien pretended it meant nothing, she knew the truth. Something had shifted, and she wasn't sure they could ever go back to what they were before. Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story in the comments below. All your comments are the motivation for us to create better stories. Don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stories. Thank you very much. Sierra Lane sat alone in her small office at City Pulse, the glow from her laptop screen casting sharp light across her tired, determined face. The clock on the wall read 2 a.m., but she couldn't stop. Not yet. The article she'd written, Damien Cross, More Than a Powerhouse, had haunted her ever since that quiet kiss in the Vermont Inn. Ever since Damien had told her about his mother, Margaret Cross, a human rights lawyer whose life had been destroyed by a false media smear from Urban Voice. Now every word she typed was her way of telling the world who Damien truly was, not just the cold, untouchable CEO of Cross Corp, but a man who had clawed his way through heartbreak to build something meaningful. She wrote about the anonymous scholarships he funded, the injured worker he protected, the lonely figure he became beside the piano, how he hid a wounded, noble heart behind a fortress of power. She didn't write the piece to sensationalize. It wasn't a takedown or an exposé, it was a portrait. And though she omitted Urban Voice and City Pulse, knowing how deeply those names hurt him, she still felt her chest tighten every time she reread it. Because even the purest story could expose pain, and Damien had trusted her. She saved the draft and emailed it privately to Editor-in-Chief Nora Baxter with a clear note. "Draft only. Do not publish until I speak to Damien." Then, exhausted, she laid her head on the desk and whispered into the dark, "Please let this be the right thing." The next morning, City Pulse buzzed with an unusual tension. People looked at Sierra with strange expressions, some curious, others uncomfortable. She entered the newsroom to find Nora waiting, holding a stack of papers with a grim expression. "Lane," Nora said sharply, "we need to talk. Now." Sierra took the papers and froze. Damien Cross, More Than a Powerhouse. It was her draft, unpolished, unfinished, with red highlights marking the most personal passages, especially the one about his mother. Her breath caught. "Who printed this?" she demanded, voice shaking. "I said do not publish. It wasn't ready." Nora's face didn't soften. "Doesn't matter who printed it. What matters is Damien Cross has it. He called this morning, furious, said you pretended to care just to get his story. He wants to see you. Now." Sierra's knees went weak. Somehow, maybe someone had accessed Nora's email. Maybe it was deliberate sabotage. Her draft had reached Damien. And now the man she had come to admire, maybe even love, thought she'd betrayed him. She raced to Cross Corp, heart hammering, sprinting up to the 42nd floor. Damien's office was cold, dim with the gray light pouring in from the windows. He stood behind his desk, the printed article clenched in one hand, eyes like frozen steel. "Miss Lane," he said, voice low and cutting, "I trusted you. I told you about my mother, about what the media did to her, and your response is this? You dig it up so the world can pick it apart all over again? You're no different than Urban Voice." Her chest tightened, tears threatening, but she held them back. "Damien, no, you're wrong. I wrote this to honor you, to show the world the man who rose from pain and still chose compassion. I never meant to hurt you. I wasn't going to publish it without your permission." Damien slammed the article onto his desk, the pages fanning out like a wound split open. "Honor me. You work for City Pulse, the same paper that inherited Urban Voice's legacy. You think I believe you didn't know? That those 7 days, that kiss, were just your way of earning my trust?" Her voice broke. "I didn't know at first, but I swear once I did, I stopped. I wrote this because I care, Damien. What happened between us wasn't fake. None of it was." But his eyes, filled with betrayal, told her it didn't matter. "I can't believe a word you say," he said hoarsely. "Get out. Don't come back." Sierra wanted to fight, to scream, to make him see. But the devastation in his voice told her the damage was done. So she left, every step away from that office tearing her apart. Back at City Pulse, she walked straight to her desk, pulled out a flash drive, and wrote her resignation letter. She placed both on Nora's desk. On a small note taped to the USB, she scribbled, "I wrote this so the world could see who he really is, not to break him. I hope one day he understands." Then she walked out of the newsroom and into the cold chaos of New York, where the October wind and sirens couldn't drown out the pain inside her chest. She had chosen Damien, chosen his heart over the career she had dreamed of since she was a girl stealing newspapers just to read the headlines. But as she looked up at the towers of glass and steel surrounding her, she didn't know if she had just lost everything, or finally done the one thing that truly mattered. Damien Cross sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Cross Corp, the gray October light of New York filtering through the window, casting a somber hue across his face, as if even the light wished to hide the cracks he had spent years concealing. For the first time in years, he felt out of control. Not of Cross Corp, not of million-dollar deals, and certainly not of his own heart. On the desk lay a small note from City Pulse. Sierra Lane's final message. "I wrote to show the world who you truly are. Not to hurt you. I hope one day you'll understand." His fingers trembled as he clutched the note, as if it were the last thread tying him to something he wasn't brave enough to name. He had read those words dozens of times, each one dragging him back to that candlelit room in Vermont, where the shadows danced in her brown eyes, where their hesitant kiss made him feel, for the first time, like more than a ghost surviving pain. But then came the article draft, Damien Cross, more than a powerhouse, with lines about his mother, about the scars left by Urban Voice and the media. He'd exploded, convinced she'd betrayed him, exploited his vulnerability. He had sent her away, voice cold as ice. But now, he knew he'd been wrong. Nora Baxter, editor-in-chief of City Pulse, had called him that morning. Her voice had been sharp, but laced with something rare: regret. "Sierra never intended to publish that piece without your permission," Nora had said. "She resigned right after you told her to leave. She chose you, Cross, over the dreams she's chased her whole life." The words hit him like a wave, drowning out every defense he had left. Sierra wasn't Urban Voice. She wasn't the kind of journalist who destroyed people for clicks. She had seen him, truly seen him, with all his scars, and he had pushed her away because he was afraid of trusting, afraid of losing again. Damien stood, pacing his office as the walls closed in. For 15 years, he had lived with the pain of his mother's death, bearing it under work, power, and unspoken grief. He had believed hiding was survival, masking the hole in his chest with contracts and control. But Sierra Lane, with her sharp tongue, fearless heart, and eyes like a world he secretly longed for, had shaken that foundation. And now her silence since that day, no emails, no calls, hurt more than any accusation ever could. It was emptiness, like the quiet living room where he had found his mother's body and her final apology. It was the ache of living years without daring to feel. He needed space, a place to confront the truth. He canceled all meetings and drove to his childhood home in rural Connecticut, the lakeside cottage where he and his mother had once shared quiet, golden afternoons. The house was old now, its roof moss-covered, windows fogged with memory. Inside, the scent of damp wood and aging books clung to him. He sat in the living room, the same spot where he'd found her letter, and let the silence wrap around him. And then, in that stillness, the truth bled through. He couldn't keep burying the pain. He'd tried to forget her, to fill the void with success and anonymous generosity. But the grief had never left. Sierra, her words, her sacrifice, had shown him a different way. To face it, to face his mother and the truth, she had done nothing wrong. She had loved him. To face himself, a man full of scars but still yearning for trust, for love. That trust, fragile like the Vermont candlelight, was Sierra's gift. She hadn't just seen the CEO. She saw the broken son, the guarded man, and chose to stay even after he pushed her away. From his mother's old desk, he took out a piece of aged stationery and a fountain pen, untouched for 15 years. He had never written a letter by hand. His world was emails and contracts. But for Sierra, he needed something real, something she could hold, the way she had once held his heart without even knowing. Slowly he wrote, "Sierra, I was wrong. I thought you were like them, the ones who took my mother, who took everything. But you're not. You saw me, not cross-corp, not the pain, me, a man scarred, afraid, and unwilling to trust. Your article? I read it again, and I saw your heart in every word, a heart trying to tell the world that I am more than grief. I've hidden for too long, thinking forgetting was the only way. But you gave me something else, belief, that I can face it, face her, face myself. Your silence, it hurts more than anything, but I hope it's not the end. If you still want to tell my story, I'll tell it with you. And maybe, if you'll let me, we can write a new story. Ours, Damien." He folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and mailed it to her Brooklyn apartment, the address he'd found in her old City Pulse file. Standing by the lake, moonlight shimmering on the water, he felt lighter, as if a weight he'd carried for 15 years had been set down. But the fear remained, that she wouldn't answer, that this hope was just a dream. He closed his eyes and saw her smile, her eyes filled with light. And for the first time in years, Damien let himself hope. Hope that love, if faced with courage, could lead him through the dark. In Brooklyn, Sierra Lane sat in her small apartment, city lights flickering through the window like stars fallen to earth. Old newspapers were stacked beside her coffee cup, cold and forgotten. She hadn't opened her laptop since quitting, hadn't written a word. It felt like the pen inside her had dried up with her dream. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was afraid. Afraid that if she wrote, she'd write about him, about Damien, his eyes like storm skies. That kiss in Vermont that made her heart beat like it never had. The way he made her believe she could be more than a reporter. She could be someone he needed. Her pain wasn't just losing her career. It was the silence. His silence. She had chosen him, given up her dream to protect his trust. But his final accusing stare at CrossCorp still haunted her. Had he ever believed her? When the doorbell rang, she startled. A mail courier handed her an envelope. The handwriting was bold but unfamiliar. She opened it, unfolded the letter, and the moment she read his name at the bottom, the tears came. Not from sorrow, but from a spark reigniting inside her. Each word was a heartbeat, each sentence a bridge back to something she hadn't dared name. He didn't just apologize. He opened up, acknowledged his pain, and invited her in. He wanted her to write with him, to face the past together, and maybe to build something new. She clutched the letter to her chest, smiling through tears, and whispered, "Okay, Damien, let's write it. And maybe, let's love too." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but the letter in her hands was a promise that pain could be faced, trust could be rebuilt, and love, even when born from all the wrong places, could still lead them to something bright. Sierra Lane stood backstage at the Waldorf Astoria ballroom, her heart pounding like it might burst from her chest. Stage lights pierced through the velvet curtains, glinting off her silver evening gown, but she didn't feel like she belonged in this dazzling world. Outside, the crowd, business moguls, philanthropists, journalists, awaited the launch of the Margaret Cross Foundation, an initiative founded by Damian Cross to support human rights attorneys and victims of media malpractice. She clutched the microphone tightly, breathing deep, her gaze drifting to her trembling hand, where she could almost still feel the warmth of Damian's fingers from all the quiet moments they'd shared in secret since his letter 2 weeks ago. That letter, with its bold but heartfelt handwriting, had pulled her out of the darkness. "I was wrong. You gave me faith, that I could face it, face her, face myself. This time, let's write it together." After that, they met at a quiet cafe in Greenwich Village, where Damian, without his usual suit, sat across from her in a soft gray sweater, his icy eyes finally warm, as if he'd let a part of his wall come down. They apologized. He for accusing her, she for not telling him about the connection between City Pulse and Urban Voice. Then they made a decision to rewrite the story, not just Damian's but his mother's. Margaret Cross, the woman destroyed by lies because she dared to fight for justice. Their love, though still unnamed, had begun to bloom quietly. In stolen evenings over coffee, as Sierra shared tales of sneaking newspapers as a child, and Damian told stories of his mother playing piano. In long walks along the Hudson, where he held her hand like he was afraid she'd vanish. Every time their eyes met, Sierra felt a slow, steady fire, like the candlelight in that Vermont room. They weren't rushing. She helped him rebuild his faith in the press. He learned to confront his pain, little by little. Stronger than any love confession, these were acts of trust. The new article, Margaret Cross, The Legacy of Justice, was born from that trust. Sierra wrote it based on Damian's memories, stories of his mother's laughter after winning a case for a homeless man, of her teaching him Clair de Lune on the piano. But it didn't stop at memories. With Damian's help, Sierra dug into old documents, Margaret's letters to colleagues, case notes, and an email from a former client that proved the 2010 Urban Voice article was a paid smear campaign, funded by a real estate company she was suing. The article didn't just clear Margaret's name, it painted her as a symbol of integrity, a legacy Damian was continuing through CrossCorp and the foundation. Sierra stepped onto the stage. The spotlight made her blink, but she found Damian in the front row, sharp in a black suit, his blue eyes locked on hers, not with suspicion, but with unwavering belief. She raised the mic. Her voice shook slightly, but it was clear. "I'm Sierra Lane," she began, "and a few months ago I thought Damian Cross was a suit-wearing tyrant who only knew how to sign contracts and scare interns." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Damian raised a brow, lips curling into a smile only for her. Sierra smiled back, steadied herself. "But I was wrong. I rewrote this story, not just about Damian, but about resilience, about a man who lost his mother to a media lie, but chose to turn that pain into hope, and about his mother, Margaret Cross, a human rights lawyer defamed, whose legacy will live on through this foundation and through the article we wrote together." She paused, her eyes meeting Damian's again. In that moment, the whole room faded. "We wrote Margaret Cross, The Legacy of Justice together," she continued, voice catching. "Through Damian's memories and the evidence we found, we showed the world that Margaret wasn't someone who took bribes. She was a woman who fought for the voiceless. Damian brought that legacy to life, and I'm honored to have been part of that story." Applause erupted, but Sierra saw only Damian. He stood, clapping, his eyes shimmering, not for the article, but for her, the woman who had given him the courage to confront his past and share what he once wanted to bury. As she stepped off stage, she handed him the mic. Their fingers brushed, warm and familiar, like the kiss in Vermont, now stronger, like an unspoken vow. Damian took the stage, thanked the audience, but his voice trembled when he mentioned his mother. "Margaret Cross taught me that justice is worth fighting for," he said, eyes searching for Sierra. "And Sierra Lane taught me that sometimes you have to face the pain to find hope." Thank you, Sierra, for not giving up on me. The article published under City Pulse's Hope and Humanity section, where Sierra returned as a freelance contributor after Nora's personal invitation, became a phenomenon. Readers called it the most moving article of the year. Social media was flooded with praise, a tribute to Margaret Cross, and a song of resilience sung by her son. After the event, Sierra stood on the hotel balcony, watching the glowing Manhattan skyline. Damien joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He handed her one. "You did well, Miss Lane," he said in a teasing baritone, "though I still haven't forgiven you for calling me a suit-wearing tyrant." Sierra laughed, sipping her wine, but her eyes softened. "I was scared, Damien," she admitted quietly. "Scared I'd hurt you, like Urban Voice did. But you gave me trust, that we could tell this story, together." He set down his glass, stepped closer, and cupped her cheek gently, fingers trembling, as if afraid she'd disappear. "And you gave me trust," he murmured, voice husky, eyes deep as an ocean, "that I didn't have to hide the pain, that I could face it, face her, face you. I love you, Sierra. Not because you wrote the article, but because you're the only person who's ever made me want to live honestly." Her heart pounded, tears spilling even as she smiled, her signature spark still in her gaze. "I love you too, Damien Cross," she whispered, "even if you did almost drive me crazy with financial reports. But I guess that was the price of finding you." He laughed, pulled her into his arms, and they kissed under the New York lights. A kiss deep, certain, no longer hesitant, as if both had finally arrived at the end of a long, winding road. They stood there shoulder to shoulder, knowing their love, built on wrong doors, old wounds, and shared words, was a story worth keeping. Not just for them, but for anyone who believes in redemption and in beginning again.